Well, because of mounting medical evidence that lead is damaging children's brains, CLEAR, that's the Campaign for Lead-Free Air, was launched a month ago with the backing of the leaders of the three main opposition parties and with the support of over 130 MPs. Now, the present norm of lead in petrol is 0.4 grams per litre, but last May the government decided to reduce this amount to 0.15 grams by 1985. But this is just not going far enough, according to CLEAR. They say that children will be at risk even from this level of pollution.
Now, lead-free petrol is possible. In the United States, every car built since 1975 has been required by law to be manufactured to take lead-free petrol, and every petrol station required to supply it. More than half the cars in the United States now run on unleaded fuel. Japan is almost entirely lead-free, and Australia hopes to become lead-free by the mid-1980s.
So, what's to stop us changing to lead-free petrol? Well, let's find out by discussing it with Tony Fraser, who is the Director of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, together with Dr. Robin Russell-Jones, a member of CLEAR's Scientific and Medical Advisory Board. As you might expect, we had invited the UK Petroleum Industry Association to take part in our discussion, but they told us they didn't wish to appear on a programme alongside someone from the medical profession, so they declined our invitation. But let's start with somebody from the motoring profession. Mr. Fraser, what are the problems for the manufacturers in going lead-free?
The main problem is that engines will have to be redesigned, and the current generation of engines being used in this country cannot run on lead-free petrol. We are going down to 0.15 grams per litre by 1985, but we are maintaining, or the government has required that we maintain, the octane rating, which will allow all the present cars to operate. And that will reduce the amount of lead being emitted. And your 10,000 tonnes figure, incidentally, is wrong. It's 7,000 tonnes. It will go down instantly.
Dr. Russell-Jones, how do you react to that?
Well, I think that the medical evidence is continuing to accumulate at rather a disturbing rate. I think that since the three opposition parties have already pledging themselves to lead-free fuel, it is almost inevitable that we are going to get lead-free petrol in this country, because as soon as we have a non-Tory government, then their policy will be lead-free fuel. So what we ought to be discussing is not whether we go to lead-free petrol, but how it can best be done. And as I understand it, there are two ways that you could introduce lead-free fuel. Either you can just take the lead out, in which case you end up with low-octane petrol that hasn't got any lead in. Or if you take the lead out, then you have to maintain your octane rating by refining your petrol up more at the refinery. Now, as Mr. Fraser says, if you just take the lead out and then you put 92-octane fuel in the cars, then most existing cars on the road will not run. And that is why CLEAR is not insisted that lead-free petrol be made available for existing cars. But as far as new cars are concerned, you can run them on lead-free petrol in two ways, either by redesigning the engines for low-octane motoring, or by maintaining the octane number and then keeping the same engines.
Well, Mr. Fraser, you used the expression redesigning the engines. In fact, it isn't really a radical redesign, is it? It's something to do with hardening up the valve seats, as I understand.
That is a radical redesign, something in the region of £350 million for a completely new engine, and that will involve setting the valve seating, as you said, but also you get a lubricating effect from the lead additive, which will be lost, and so you have to design it very differently in order to make it work. You've got to realise that we are all very concerned about lead in people's bloodstreams. We're not taking an attitude that we don't care. It does matter. On the other hand, there are other very major sources of lead in people's bloodstreams, such as food and water, and lead from petrol only accounts on the maximum estimate for 10% of the lead that is ingested. Now, we think that if you're going to do something about that, you should be thinking about the major sources such as lead in paint and lead in water pipes. But the motor industry can, of course, design car engines to run on unleaded petrol. It will cost something, the consumer will have to pay for that in the end. And he must have the information available to him to decide which way he wants to go.
Forgive me, without getting too technical, isn't it true that British manufacturers already make engines that can run on lead-free petrol when you export a British car to an overseas market?
Depends on the size of the market to which you're going, so whether you have to comply with the emission controls. Yes, they can be done.
They can. How do you feel about all this, Dr. Russell-Jones?
Well, hardening seat valves for new cars is not a very expensive process. Obviously, if you had to do it to an existing car, it might be. But we've had an estimate for hardening seat valves of about £1 a car. So since the motor manufacturers already do it for existing cars, I can't see that that is an insuperable technological problem. I would, however, like to take up this question of the contribution that lead in petrol makes to the amount of lead in our bodies. This figure of 10% has been bandied around, but it only applies to the amount of lead that the average child inhales directly. What you also have to consider is that lead in petrol gets into the air and it then falls out as dust, and a lot of lead makes its way into children's bodies from hand-to-mouth activities because they put dusty things in their mouths.
Well, however the figures come down, it's very disturbing. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed.